and Nepal. And unlike the tentativeness of India and Australia, there is no hesitation, no tentativeness, and no ambiguity on its, for want of a better word, satellite states. On that note, let me quickly now welcome Major General B.K. Sharma, Director USI, the force behind some of these discussions that are taking place. And let me welcome him to set the stage for what I believe could be a very exhausting, informative discussion and dialogue in the next 60 minutes. General Sharma.
Thank you, Gauri, and a very good evening to senior officers, panelists, and participants. In fact, I'm grateful to Gauri Devedi to foster this relationship between USI and Institute. USI is India's oldest typical track 1.5 institution with a membership of about 15,000 officers from armed forces, diplomats, civil servants, and members of the community. So, very warm welcome to Dr. Aparna Pandey and Bhabha. And I'm grateful to Dr. Pandey that she's representing the Hudson. And that maybe this is a big, very, I would say, a fulfilling relationship between the two institutions. I was reading a little bit about Hudson, and what excited my mind was that among other goals that you have, you underscore that the purpose of Hudson research is to challenge thinking and to manage strategic transition to an interdisciplinary research. And I was reminded of what, the futurologist like Pierre Wack had said, that the major cause of strategic failure is the policy makers being locked in flawed assumptions. And that is true. Whenever, you deal with organizations which have a certain DNA characteristics. Now, as we know that conventional research is marred by silo-based linear thinking, and they focus more on trend extrapolation and predetermined elements. So the kind of research which Hudson is doing, which focuses more on strategic discontinuities and probably critical uncertainties, which are the drivers of change. And this is where the interests of Hudson are aligned with USI. We have a very unique center, what we call is the Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation, which deals with scenario building and strategic gaming for a policy makers at different levels. Now, coming to the subject proper, the subject is very well known, and I don't to audience like this, I have to explain the importance of the subject. And we know that how it is romanticized by parallel mountains, deeper oceans, stronger than steel, and sweeter than honey. And there is a new that Chinese have coined and what they call iron dagger. And in one of his articles, Ambassador Haqqani has beautifully summarized said by China, Pakistan is a low-cost deterrence against India. And for Pakistan, China is a high-cost security guarantor. I think that sums it all. Now, as we know that China is the largest recipient of military arsenal from Pakistan is the largest recipient of military arsenal from China. And today their military cooperation or defense cooperation is and it goes up escalation. It starts from nuclear, conventional, non-linear, cyber, outer space, information space. Name a thing and that is very much there. But from Indian perspective, what matters more first, there are three factors. One are the strategic implications of Karakram, which gives us competitive edge both Pakistan, China, particularly the sector. Second is Gwadar virtually being a maritime strategic outpost of China, together with Djibouti and maybe something doing in Kampuchea and warning in due course of time. So this has its own strategic security implications which need to be seen in its totality. More importantly, the recent developments have shown us that there is some kind of a collaboration at the line of actual control and at the line of uh, control. Now we cannot de-link or de-hyphenate the rivals that China is set. There is so much of chemistry and so much of coordination that is taking place, and that brings all together a very new paradigm. Security implications not only for India but the region as a whole as well. So it is from that point of view that we need to look at the nuances of our China's strategic nexus in a new paradigm. What are its implications for India, implications for the region, and for the world at large? As we know that and US have some shared and some divergent perception about this nexus. Based on our respective, we do not sort of start at this relationship purely from the perspective of the other side. So those realities have to be factored in. So it's important for us to look at next in the light of recent developments that have taken place in deepening of India and US relationship, be it Quad, Malabar, expanded Malabar 2.2 meetings, and the signing of after Limoa and now Bika, a very, very significant kind of event. So I'm sure that the panel today will help us in understanding the nuances of this relationship from a new and perhaps help us in cross-fertilizing of ideas, how to reimagine this whole relationship and probably come out with some very good ideas to have more collaboration to balance this of China strategic nexus. So with these few words, I'll now hand over back to Gauri Devedi to conduct proceedings.
In fact, on that note, let me welcome Dr. Pandey. Dr. Aparna Pandey is the director of the Initiative on the Future of India and South Asia at Hudson Institute. She is the author of 3 books, one as recent as August this year, which is Making India Great, Promise of a Reluctant Global Power. Needless to say, she understands this region very well. Dr. Pandey, so many moving pieces. How do you assess the situation and the dynamics that are at play from here on?
Thank you so much. I would like to start by thanking the United Service Institution of India for co-hosting this event with Hudson. Special thanks to General Sharma and Gauri Dwivedi. It's a pleasure to be on the panel with Ambassador Bambawale. And actually, there are a number of people on the screen whom I know very well and for a very long time. So thank you. Great to see all of you. US grand strategy since the end of the Second World War was to build a system of alliances around the globe, including Asia, that would help uphold what was called the liberal international order. Since 1971, this policy also rested on the notion that a China that was diplomatically and economically integrated with the globe would over time become a responsible player. That has not happened, and China has instead sought to undermine this order and create a Chinese-led order. The Indo-Pacific strategy reflects a recognition by the US strategic community that there's a need to reassert the American-led international order by bolstering not just existing allies, but new partners like India. Irrespective of who wins the elections next week, Washington has recognized that the so-called peaceful rise of China was a myth and a peer competition is here to stay. Now, from the 1950s, American policymakers have looked at India as the counter to China. This goes back to the 1962 war when the US supported and assisted India. And the image of India as the counter to China has remained strong and has re-emerged in recent years. It is visible in the US national security strategy, Indo-Pacific strategy, renaming PACOM as Indo-PACOM, the Quad, statements made by high-level American officials. During the latest 2+2 ministerial, American support for India in its current standoff with China was on full display. However, American support for India in its conflict with China has not yet automatically translated into US viewing the China-Pakistan relationship with the same lens as Delhi does. US grand strategy has normally centered around global interests, and it has often tended to accommodate regional issues within the global interests. So, for example, as all of you know, during the Cold War, American focus was on peer competition with Soviet Union, which meant it looked at every region primarily on who would ally with the US against the Soviets. In South Asia, this meant the US supported Pakistan and not the natural power of the region, India. A strong US-India partnership notwithstanding, American national security strategy still revolves around its national interests, and regional issues are always viewed from that prism. So for India, Pakistan may be a part of the China problematic. For the US, China is the global issue, Pakistan is a regional one. Now, Pakistan was an American ally, a frontline state during the war on terrorism, obtained over $40 billion in security and economic assistance. Because the US policy towards Pakistan rested on trying to convince Pakistan's military establishment to change its strategic calculus. Didn't happen. And in recent years, especially under the Trump administration, US policy has been one of minimal engagement, no security assistance, and rather applying pressure on Pakistan for specific issues, act against terror groups, support, the end game in Afghanistan. While Washington has followed the deepening Sino-Pakistan relationship, there's still a presumption that the US wields enough soft and hard power leverage over Pakistan. American diplomats argue that at the end of the day, the Pakistani elite prefer to send their children to United States to study, that American economic investment is needed by Pakistan, and that despite access to Chinese military technology, Islamabad will need continued access to American military equipment and especially American spare parts. What I would argue, and some others do as well, is that this ignores that there have been changes in the China-Pakistan relationship. 1/5 of Pakistan's debt is owed by China. Contrast to 8,000 Pakistani students studying in the US, over 100,000 Pakistani students study in China. And there has been a steady rise in the amount of Chinese military equipment used by the Pakistan military. I will stop here and I look forward to the discussion and any further queries. Thank you.
Okay, let me quickly, in fact, bring in Ambassador Bambavle as well to give us a perspective from the New Delhi side. He is someone who understands China very well. He understands Pakistan very well, former ambassador to both Pakistan, China, 17 years of dealing with the Chinese in various capacities. Ambassador Bambavle, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gauri. And let me also start by thanking USI of India and Hudson Institute for including me in this very interesting subject. I have been allocated 5 minutes to talk about the New Delhi perspective. Of course, I'm not sitting in New Delhi, I'm sitting in Pune, which is a different part of India. So I'll give you a Pune perspective, which I think also overlaps the New Delhi perspective of the nexus between China and Pakistan. And I'm going to try to restrict myself to those 5 minutes as Aparna has, so that we have a larger conversation and a discussion amongst all of us who are gathered here today. And I'm going to make 5 points in my 5 minutes. The first, of course, is that there is absolutely very little doubt, as Aparna has just brought out, that there is this very close nexus between China on the one hand and Pakistan on the other. But since the 5th of August 2019, which is when India undertook new arrangements for the administration of domestic territories, which are now called the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and the Union Territory of Ladakh. Since that date, the nexus between China and Pakistan has got even closer and even tighter. And I would go so far as to say that the nexus is now almost an alliance. So this is my first point, that the China-Pakistan nexus is today almost an alliance. The second point I'd like to make is that China counts on the Pakistan army to ensure that its own interests, that China's interests within Pakistan, are given sufficient priority, high priority, and sufficient salience in Pakistan's own domestic affairs. There is very little doubt that this is backed, as Dr. Pandey has very well brought out, by military hardware exchanges between the two countries, and that Pakistan gets a lot of its military hardware today from China. This is point number 2. Point number 3 is this kind of nexus is now backed up by an economic aspect, which is growing stronger by the day, which we refer to as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And what is happening there is that China is assisting Pakistan in building various aspects of its economy, in strengthening various aspects of its economy, such as infrastructure development, including power shortages, which Pakistan traditionally and habitually faces. China is now investing in that as part of the CPEC to help them tide over these problems. China is also going to set up industrial zones along the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor so that employment generation takes place at various points on this corridor. So what we're seeing is that apart from the military to military or the China to Pak military strength and nexus, there is also an economic dependence which is being built up in Pakistan and which is increasing by the day. In other words, Pakistan is getting almost entirely dependent on China economically, and its economic dependency ratio on China is increasing by the day. Which leads me to my fourth point, which is that in such a situation, I think most Indian military and other planners, and all of you can vouch for that, now plan for a two-front situation where both Pakistan and China are very closely involved. And General B.K. Sharma was hinting at this when he spoke about the LAC and the LOC and some kind of fusion between the two. And which brings me to my last and final point before I close and hand back to Gauri, and I hope we can have a discussion on this, that in this scenario where you have this very tight nexus or even an alliance between China and Pakistan, India-US relations are not only trending towards getting stronger and becoming a real partnership, but this will go ahead and it will go on this trend line irrespective of who wins the next US elections in a few days from now. So I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Gauri. I hope I have said enough to sort of awake your interest, and I do look forward to a discussion. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you to both the speakers for keeping their opening comments as crisp as possible. There are some perks of being the moderator, which is that I get to ask at least the first question till the time some questions come in the chat box. And this is something I asked both to Dr. Dr. Pandey as well as Ambassador Bambavle, which is that, while there's been so much of talk about how there is bipartisan agreement about how to deal with China and how the closeness between US and India is going to increase, there are a lot of skeptics who believe that the Biden administration may view India differently. And there are two reasons why I ask this, that I was just going through some latest surveys by CSIS as well as the Lowy Institute, and they both seem to suggest that in Asia Pacific, Trump is viewed to be more stronger in terms of taking on China, and also the Trump view is more favorably disposed towards India as compared to Biden possibility of a Biden administration? That's the larger question I'm asking to both the panelists.
I'll try and take a stab at it, and then Ambassador Bambawale, I'm sure, will also add. So 3 quick things. One, I actually would argue that there are 3 main pegs of the India-US relationship. There's a strategic dimension, which includes military, defense, views of the world. There's an economic dimension, and there's a people-to-people. If we look at both the Democrats and Republicans over the years, the Democrats have always sort of argued for a relationship with India going back to the 1950s. Every Democratic US president has built a relationship with India. And actually, their view has been that it should be a strategic altruism. India's rise is good for the US. That has been the view of more recent Republican administrations as well. So the last 4 American presidents and the last 4 US administrations every American president has visited India, whether Republican or Democrat. That's the first part. Second, instead of sort of hypothetically saying what a President Biden would do, why don't we look at his record? Vice President Biden, Senator Biden has always sort of, spoken highly about India. We shouldn't forget he was among the senators who pushed and supported the India-US civil nuclear deal and convinced many of his Democratic senators and colleagues to agree to it. He has always championed the India-US relationship. Coming to the third part, I actually think that, India is not a country where while personal relationships matter, Indian prime ministers have had good personal relationships with almost every American president, and especially the last 4. President Clinton came, President George W. Bush came, President Obama came twice, and President Trump came. They were different prime ministers. We shouldn't forget that. And each Indian prime minister had a good relationship with the American counterpart. So I think the personal dimension will remain irrespective of who forms. But I would add, the US alliance system is important. And the Democrats value the American alliance system sort of as much as the Republicans do. I don't think that there's any difference in that. The Democrats will support whether it's Japan or South Korea, it's Taiwan, ASEAN, or Europe. So the Atlantic and the Pacific Alliance Network will remain under Biden. Will we have certain, areas where we differ? Yes, but then we differ even right now a little bit on Pakistan, a little bit on Afghanistan, a little bit on the Middle East and Iran. Geographically for us, Indo-Pacific should include the Middle East or West Asia, as we call it, right? But that comes into CENTCOM, not Indo-PACOM. So those will remain, but I don't believe there's going to be that drastic a difference. Ambassador Bambawale?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'll just share a couple of other points with our listeners and with you, Gauri. First, let me say that, this playing up of President Trump as being stronger on the Asia Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, I think a lot of it has to do with the electoral process within the United States. So, we have to listen to it, but we have to try to get away from the local electoral process, which is currently underway for the next few days in the United States. But you use the word skeptic and skepticism, and you're absolutely right there that many people, both in India and the USA, have reason to be a bit skeptical about what the United States could do. Because just a few years ago, when in the early years of the Obama presidency, when President Obama made his first visit to China, there was talk of a G2 between China and the United States. So that is where the skepticism and the skeptics come from. And there is no doubt that, that was an event and that was a situation which took place at that point of time. But since then, I think what has happened is that the assessment in the United States itself, and this cuts across political boundaries, this is an across the aisle sort of assessment. And the assessment of China today is that it is not merely a peer competitor, but that the United States must must stand up to this competition which is emanating out of China. And both either President Trump or President Biden, whoever the American people choose in a few days, I think there will be this strong competition with China, this taking on China, which will be a factor in in either administration. And therefore, I believe that the relationship with India is going to strengthen irrespective of who wins the US elections, whether we have a President Trump 2.0 or whether we have a President Biden. But I also agree that there may be a difference between the two in style, but not in substance. So that is why I said in my opening remarks that the trend line of the India-US relationship is that of strengthening, and it is going to strengthen immeasurably in the coming few months and years. Thank you.
There's one question that has come in, and I want to just build on it, which says that will the US, under a Biden administration, will the US push for some controls or holds on sectarian messaging by current Indian leaders? Let me just add to it, essentially, the issue of Kashmir, which impacts both China and Pakistan, which is why, of course, you've seen the kind of messaging that has come in from both these countries since last year. Do you think the view around Kashmir and some of the decisions taken by India would be perceived differently under a Biden administration and could have a larger impact on the policy towards the entire region? Dr. Pandey?
Sure. I'll make... Don't know what's... Okay. For some reason, it was jumping back and forth. Anyway, 3 quick points. First, will issues of democracy, human rights, and free religious freedom matter in a Biden administration? Yes, they will. They've always been important for a US, for Democrats. But I would say it would also depend on, the question is it going to be the Democrats in the White House, or also, stronger Democrats in the House and in the Senate? If all 3 flip, then, most of the discussions on these issues happen, are not the administration is asking these questions. It ends up being hearings in the Hill or the House or the Senate. So if those are flipped, there will be a rise, but we shouldn't forget that there was a discussion on Kashmir even last year under a Republican president. So I don't think that will change. I think there will be discussions, but that will be because, at the end of the day, Americans you are going to ask your friends and you are going to ask fellow democracies to live up to their ideals. So I do believe that will happen. 2, will a Biden administration follow those 2 strands? Of the one hand, building strategic ties with India, but on the other, also pushing India on democracy and human rights? If we go by what happened during the Obama administration, when it was a Biden vice presidency, I'm sure all of you recall, President Obama mentioned this in his City Fort speech, as well as his other talks across the country. So will it continue under Biden administration? Yes, it will. But I would emphasize that does not mean that the India-US relationship will not be strong. I agree with Ambassador Bambawale. The relationship will be strong. It will remain strong. But any relationship between friends, you will always have a little more friction. You don't have frictions with rivals or enemies. You always have frictions with countries you get along well with. So I would make those 2. I mean, there will be a strong India-US relationship, but there will be more questions. Yes.
Ambassador Bambawale, you want to add to it, and then I'll take Dr. Chawla your question.
Yeah, sure. I want to take head-on, Gauri, about, and I think you were hinting at this and asking this, that will India face greater pressure from a Biden presidency as compared to a Trump presidency? And the clear-cut answer is yes. If President Biden gets elected, or if Vice President Biden becomes President Biden in a few days, India should be ready and prepared to face greater pressure on the question of Jammu and Kashmir. But I can also tell you that, I think India in the past 70 years has shown its resolve on this entire question of Jammu and Kashmir. And we will continue to show that resolve to President Biden also. Let me stop there.
Okay, Dr. Shalini Chawla, before I come to you and your question, there are some questions related to Pakistan. Let me just quickly just include all of them and address some of them to Ambassador Bambavle. So one is around the kind of internal strife that Pakistan is seeing right now. Apart from the discussion that has been on about how big a deterrent will Pakistan really be now, given its present internal mess that it is in, and the larger India policy towards Pakistan.
Yeah, thank you. Look, and there are many in this group I know who have watched, studied Pakistan for many years. So those of us who have studied Pakistan for several years and even decades, don't consider the current turmoil or the current mess as being anything special. It has been in this kind of mess earlier too. So I don't see that the current situation, political or economic in Pakistan, sort of reduces the threat level from Pakistan in terms of an LAC or LOC or a Pak-China nexus. I think India has to be prepared for it, and I'm sure General Malik will be able to speak much more about this. But any military planner or any other planner, even at the political level, will plan for a common two-front situation as we move ahead in 2020 and beyond. So that's as far as the domestic situation is concerned and the threat perception that arises from it. Thank you so much, Gauri, for that question.
Since we are talking about the military dimensions, General Sharma, you want to add to it? We can get General Malik as well to also make his remarks around the military dimensions of this nexus.
See, who is driving the entire security discourse in Pakistan? It is the Pakistan military establishment, right? And their entire primacy and legitimacy comes from continued conflict with India. So therefore, in one form or the other, I think this is going to be a constant, irrespective of how the internal dynamics of Pakistan political dynamics play out. So India, for one, has to be prepared for a two-front scenario. Well, how that manifests, there could be different grades of that, keeping in view the internal dynamics. But the threat as a whole is there, staring us in the eyes, and we have to be prepared to meet it at different levels.
General Malik, you want to add to this, sir? There are some experts who feel that, maybe it should be now a three-front war also, given the kind of changes one has seen in the India-Nepal situation and the closeness in the China-Nepal relationship. You want to add to this, sir, the security and military implications?
Firstly, I don't think we should bring in Nepal in this whole conflict situation yet. It's too early for us to start thinking the relationship that we have between Nepalese army and the Indian army is of quite a different qualitative nature. So that is one point I would like to mention. The second point is I'd like to qualify what General Sharma has just now mentioned. While there is a likelihood of a two-front war scenario, but the qualification is that in case Pakistan wages a war against India, initiates a war against India, Chinese may not want to enter with the same kind of gusto as Pakistan would expect it to be, because that will have a much larger implication, not only on our border, but globally. Similarly, if the Chinese try and do something, we can expect more from Pakistan, and Pakistan joining the Chinese to indulge in the two-war front. Two-front war, sorry.
Unmute yourself. Gauri, unmute. Yeah.
Dr. Shalini Chawla from the Center for Air Power Studies is asking this question essentially around the diplomatic aspects between China and Pakistan since the abrogation of Article 370, whether it is at the UN, where it raised this question 3 times, backed Pakistan completely, whether it is the FATF. Does the diplomatic nexus, which has strengthened, worry the United States? Or how concerned is it? Dr. Pandey?
So the question is, how concerned is the US about the China-Pak diplomatic nexus? I presume, Shalini, right? Dr. Chawla?
Yes.
So sort of, I would say that, China's sort of UN Security Council and FATF are slightly different, right? On FATF, China is on the board now. But China has always tried to ensure that it's not the only country which is supporting Pakistan, right? So you have Turkey and Malaysia also who support it. So it'll be, and as long as you have 3 countries, that country cannot be put on a blacklist, right? It will stay on the list that it is. So I think China tries to make sure on the FATF and such groupings that it is not seen as the only country. It will try to bring in other countries as well who will support it against Pakistan. When it comes to UN Security Council, China has tried, but as of now, the other 4 members, including Russia, have normally come on India's side or not supported China. But, I think one of the things we need to worry about is not China's support for Pakistan or China's, anti-India stance. We need to worry about how close is the Russia-China relationship. President Putin just a few days ago talked about the possibility of a Russia-China alliance. If a Russia-China alliance sort of comes about, we must not forget that in 1962, Soviet Union did not support India because there was a Sino-Soviet alliance at that time. So maybe we should worry on organizations. We should see where are the other countries going. To date, we have had the Russians on our side, but will that remain going ahead? That's something to think about because China will never vote in our favor. China will always support Pakistan, though it will try to make it seem that it is doing it in the broader interests, and it will make up sort of, some excuse. But I would say let's worry about Russia. Let's worry about the other countries as well on UN Security Council. Will they stay on India's side or is that going to change in the coming years ahead?
Ambassador Bombable, let me ask you this, sir. As far as Russia is concerned, even when the S-400 deal was being signed, there were many experts, security experts, who wanted India to not go ahead with that deal. They said that now the realignment has happened quite significantly as far as geopolitical equations are concerned. How do you see Russia's role and the Russia-India equations?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Gauri. And today for India, that is the billion-dollar question, that even as we enhance and grow our partnership with the United States, how do we keep Russia on our side? Because that is very, very important for India, not only because of the fact that a lot of our military equipment is sourced from Russia and we need spares, etc., but also because politically and diplomatically we want Russia to be on our side in case there are further problems with both China and Pakistan as we move ahead. So it is a very difficult question. But I believe that Indian diplomacy is nimble enough, it is quick enough to be able to achieve these goals of enhancing our partnership with the United States on the one hand and maintaining our partnership with Russia on the other.
Dr. Pandey, you want to add to that?
I agree with Ambassador Bombawale. I guess, my only thing is that, maybe we should also, for Russia, Russia may be looking at, sort of its near abroad and its national interests. For India, Russia matters because we don't want Russia, as Ambassador Bombawale said, getting closer to China or Pakistan, supplying more military equipment to Pakistan or signing an alliance with China. So the oil and energy and military deals with Russia are important. But what is Russia thinking? And what are Russia's priorities? We need to make sure that we come in their list of priorities and that China doesn't dominate those list of priorities, because then we will face a problem. As long as we are in their list of priorities, it's good for us. The day China becomes more important in that list, we'll start having a problem. So we just need to, be aware. I don't know if they will choose, but it's good to always think 5-10 years ahead and see what countries may be thinking about.
I think economic considerations are paramount for Russia right now.
This group, they'll be able to answer this much better than I can. But I think from a political perspective, from a diplomatic perspective, we should not expect a quick disengagement and de-escalation process. There might be some move in that direction as the winter gets colder and stronger. But unfortunately, I think our soldiers and our troops and our officers have to stay the course, just as they are doing on Siachen Glacier. And I'm afraid that they will be there through the winter and into the summer of next year. I would even say that we have to be even more careful, not just during the winter, but next spring and summer is going to be even more difficult.
General Sharma, you want to add to this, sir, since we are talking about the military security dimensions? Our soldiers are at 14,000 feet in the most inclement weather in the world.
See, as far as Indian Army is concerned, I would say Indian Armed Forces, we are mentally and psychologically prepared to brace through the situation, because our troops to fighting and sustaining in super high altitude areas. Almost we are a volunteer army, and majority of our troops have good experience of sustaining in high altitude. Now, if you look at from operational point of view, as far as the area of Pagangso Lake and area of Hot Spring, Gogra, Galwan, that area is concerned, by certain moves that we have made south of Pagangso Lake, by capturing those 20 odd heights, I think we have achieved operational parity vis-a-vis Chinese. I would even go to the extent that probably we have certain advantage vis-a-vis China. The only issue that now remains for India to sort out the Dapsang Plateau. Chinese have come to Y junction, and maybe from patrolling point 9 to 13, we are not able to out patrolling. Not that we can't bypass those locations and go to the areas that we want to go, but on sustained basis, we want to resume that activity. So, to my way of looking at, Chinese have now realized the resolve of Indian military, political, and diplomatic establishment, because all three prongs are moving in the same direction. And during the 8th round of talks, probably Dapsang is going to be the action point, because we do not want to look at it in a segmented manner, but look at the whole package. And Chinese have a habit that in the past, this 2 step forward and 1 step backward, and ultimately they want to, in the garb of some, to give you a fait accompli. I think we've seen that game, and this over India is not going to take that bite, and we would probably will look at a more comprehensive and wholesome solution to this. On the contrary, the reports that are now emerging that probably Chinese are facing the brunt of winter far more than what Indian troops are, and therefore they are looking for a dignified exit, but that exit will only come through a very sustained and a very deft diplomatic negotiation, so that India did not work beyond a certain point about the outcomes.
Yes, indeed. In fact, sir, Ambassador, let me ask you this, sir, about the possibility of India now exploiting or using some of the other cards it has which it hasn't used so far against China, whether it is Taiwan, whether it is Tibet, or whether, as one of the questions suggests, quote unquote, get more adventurous in the South China Sea. But essentially, options that New Delhi has so far refrained from using.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, but I think definitely on some of those fronts, on some of those subjects, on some of those issues, India will move ahead. For example, we can easily do more with Taiwan without fundamentally altering our one China policy. For example, we know that there already is a thriving trade, economic, cultural, educational relationship between India and Taiwan. And I think we should move that forward. Perhaps there can even be a free trade agreement or what is called a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement between India and Taiwan. And that will not violate our one China policy, because we already have agreements of not this kind, but of an economic kind with Taiwan. So I think that we should be doing more with Taiwan. Also, it works in well with our whole policy of Atmanirbharta, of building more resilient supply chains, because Taiwanese firms are investing a lot in India. Taiwan is a very dependable partner, and I think it works well to our advantage in all the areas that we are now currently focusing on and working on. So I would strongly recommend that India should expand its economic, technical, trade relationship with Taiwan, and that will not violate, our one China policy. As far as Tibet and South China Sea is concerned, I think we are already active as part of the Quad. We are already active as part of the Indo-Pacific Initiative. I think we can continue to do more in that under that rubric or under that umbrella. So thank you.
Before I get in Dr. Roshan's question, there is a follow-up there. I think with Taiwan, the biggest association between India and Taiwan could be around 5G, semiconductors. All those are spaces where there can be a lot of collaboration between New Delhi and Taipei. But, sir, a follow-up question there has been that the moment India makes any steps or takes any steps in these regard, there could be a backlash or retaliation in the Northeast, something that has held India back for so long.
Yeah, I agree with that. There could be a backlash, there could be a retaliation in the Northeast, but I think the first retaliation will come in the economic sphere, and it will not come merely because of anything India is doing differently or newly with Taiwan, but it could even come in reaction to what steps India itself has taken so far in banning so many Chinese apps, in ensuring that foreign direct investment is properly scrutinized before it enters India, in ensuring that Chinese companies are not allowed to win contracts in public procurement processes in India. All these are measures that India has already taken, and China could and will definitely, we should expect it, retaliate against that. And we have a certain, every action will have a reaction. So we have our own reactions ready in case China retaliates. So it's not just in the Northeast, that is a possibility, definitely. But I would think we should expect more of a retaliation on the economic front in reaction and retaliation to what we have already done and what we intend to do. You have to unmute yourself, Gauri.
Dr. Pandey, this is a question around the Russia-China equations, and Dr. Roshan from USI is asking essentially that maybe we need to not presume that Russia would not like to have multipolar dimensions as well, and not want to completely be in the sort of the equation only with China.
Absolutely, but we should keep both sort of, we shouldn't presume Russia will always, sort of keep us in mind. Similarly, we shouldn't presume that Russia will sort of, will not keep us in mind. So I am open. I just want to make sure that, sort sort of one shouldn't presume that that India is high on the list for Russian interests, just because Russia is high on the list for our interests. Every country decides its foreign policy and defense policy based on its own national interests. So how does Russia see its near abroad? How does it see the globe? Russia has an economic problem. Russia has a declining population. Most of Russia's economies depend on either oil energy or on defense sales. So, sort of as we purchase military from other countries and as we purchase oil from other countries, we are not going to be that high on their list. We cannot provide the money they need. China can. So, yes, they will want, a diverse relationship. Their near abroad matters to them. So what happens in Central Asia matters to them. What happens in Afghanistan and South Asia matters to them. But we should keep an open mind. We shouldn't presume that Russia of today is the Soviet Union of the past. That's all I want. That's all I want to emphasize.
Gauri, if I could just intervene, there's a very good question in the chat box that because of this stronger nexus between China and Pakistan, and even an alliance, as I called it, should India be talking to Pakistan? Should India make some diplomatic moves to, to talk to Pakistan, solve the Pakistan question, issue, etc.? And I'd like to take that head on and answer that question that, unfortunately, the current power structure in Pakistan is such that the Pakistan army or the armed forces call the shots where foreign policy and security policy is concerned. And we have seen over the last so many decades that when that is the case, then it is very difficult to come to any kind of, agreement with Pakistan. So as long as the current power structure in Pakistan continues, and General V.K. Sharma had spoken about this, it's going to be very difficult for India to sort out its issues with Pakistan. I would go so far as to say that if we can, and it will happen on its own because of domestic changes in Pakistan, including the current PDM 11-party process, which has already begun. If we can, we have to change that power structure in Pakistan so that elected representatives of the people hold true power as it is in India. Only then it will be worthwhile talking to them. Till then, with the current power structure, talks and terror cannot go together. I think that's the best policy.
Ambassador, I have a follow-up question to that, sir, that the recent developments have exposed the fault lines in Pakistani politics like never before. But that has also exposed the sheer vulnerabilities of a nuclear-armed hostile state. So that makes it even more vulnerable to any realignment of Chinese priorities. And is that a concern that New Delhi should have?
Yes, of course, that is a concern because, as you rightly said, Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state as far as we are concerned, irrespective of what, the international community may think. So it is a matter of concern to India. But I think that, if, as you rightly said, the fault lines are there, they have been there for many decades, they have been apparent for many decades, but they have not led to a change in the structure of power in the way that power is used in Pakistan. Unless that changes, it will be very difficult for India and Pakistan to have any kind of rapprochement or any kind of coming together, or at least a meeting of minds. Look after your own immediate interests and let the other country do its own thing. That can only happen when there is a true democracy in Pakistan, where the elected representatives of the people of Pakistan call the shots, not only on economic and domestic policy, but on foreign policy and security policy also.
Gauri, could I jump in for a minute here? I'd like to add on to what Ambassador Bambawale said. It's interesting. I'm sure China is also watching all this. And so, it's sort of, as the quotation goes, it's not easy to be a benefactor or superpower ally of Pakistan, right? I mean, at some level, sort of the reason that China invested in CPEC and BRI was the hope or presumption that, economic stability may stabilize Pakistan to some extent. And then China would be able to achieve its strategic interests. it's not been that easy because Pakistan is not that easy a country to deal with. It has too many fault lines. Pakistan's economy has not grown. They have not actually taken advantage of some of the benefits of the CPEC, right? Electricity, power, if Pakistan actually built its economy, it could do a lot more. But the Pakistani military intelligence complex doesn't see any benefit in that. So, while China sort of, there's a lot of advantages China has, there are also some, I'm sure, Beijing has some concerns that the investment notwithstanding, Pakistan is not stabilizing. And Pakistan continues to remain unstable. Now, China is used to unstable allies like North Korea, who are nuclear armed. But, to sort of, a lot of what China may have thought would happen in Pakistan hasn't. And we have to see how this round of domestic, upsurge in Pakistan, where it leads to. Does it lead to an actual change, or does more of the same continue? Thank you.
I think this is a military question that I want to pose to General Sharma, which is that comments on the possibility of basing elements, including submarines, of the Indian Navy and Quad navies at Port Blair and the Andamans and their significance.
Could you repeat your question? There was a little disruption in your voice.
So it is regarding the Indian Navy and the Quad navies using Port Blair and Andamans going forward. The significance, the relevance, the messaging.
You see, while the potential is very much there to use Andaman and Nicobar, people are also been talking about having a rotational Quad headquarter there. But I think it's premature for us to actually go overboard. Let the whole structure take shape. Let it sort of, build up. And then it should be a very, very deliberate kind of thing. Know that I think India has made a decision to develop Andaman and Nicobar in a very, very significant way. And that is not only from the military point of view, but also from the civilian developmental and its other potential as a kind of a island like Singapore. So we are developing our infrastructure there. One of the, this Positon maritime reconnaissance aircraft had landed not very distant past at Andaman and Nicobar. So that potential is very much there. And we are also now talking about maybe having a maritime command which would be based on, say, Andaman and Nicobar. And as things grow and we develop their military capabilities, it's a matter of time that Andaman and Nicobar would be our strategic outpost in the Indian Ocean region and would be for Taiwan, I think, in the Indian Ocean region, what MacArthur had called as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. So Andaman and Nicobar has potential, and that must be leveraged by India. But I think not in a hurry, but with a lot of deliberation and forethought given to it.
There is one question that has come back on the India-US relations and how the US continues to perceive and dehyphenates the China-Pakistan relation. Dr. Pandey, there's a question that's coming, and I'm going to get Ambassador Bambavli as well on it, that how do we get US to not perceive us as a low-cost deterrence to China? And how do we build on the Indo-US alliance / partnership from here on?
I would sort of, I don't think we are a low-cost deterrent for the United States. The relationship between China and Pakistan is very different from the relationship between India and the US. India is not like American, like traditional treaty allies of the US, because for traditional treaty allies of the US, the other partner was a junior partner. India would never accept that, and the US has never offered that kind of a relationship or partnership. But they understand how India thinks, so I don't think the US will ever do that. Coming to the broader issue, there's a lot that the India-US relationship has achieved in the last 2 decades. A lot was on display at the latest 2+2. If you look at, the defense, it's what, 20 billion compared to 1 billion of defense trade in 2007, 2008. There's a Quad, there's Indo-Pacific. the sort of all the 4 or 5 enabling or foundational agreements, whichever way you call them. The final one was signed this time. Even in the India-US border standoff, there is not just sort of supply of American military equipment, but also US support, information. So a lot has happened. I believe what we need to do is, and I'll echo Major Sharma here, that we need to build on what we have. Building on what we have will help us do a lot more in the future. So, Andaman Nicobar is a great example, but let us also build more in all 3 services. Let us build build a closer relationship on the defense trade front, build a closer relationship on the DTTI, where where we're supposed to collaborate on future technologies, joint collaboration, the defense technology, and that is a good initiative to work on. And also we're collaborating in the region, right? So I would give the example of the US Maldives agreement that would not have been signed if India had not been on board. Because let's go back a decade, would India have sort of happily agreed to Maldives signing a military agreement with an external power? No, not unless India felt a little more comfortable with how it views US and US presence in the region. So I think there's a lot to show. There'll always be more to do. Our relationships are such that there'll always be more to do in every area. But we should sort of build on what we have and continue this for the coming years.
If I could just add a wee bit, Gauri, I think you must pay, and all of you must have done this, but you must pay very close attention to the speeches which senior cabinet ministers of the United States, of the Trump administration, have been making. And you will notice that they're attacking the Communist Party of China and not the people of China. And I think this is a very important assessment that the Americans have made, and that definitely the Trump administration has made, that the peer competition and the inimical nature of the current regime in China is what the United States is trying to take on. And therefore, what it boils down to is a question of values. And here, India and the United States are very strongly together because we share values of democracy, the right of the individual, etc., etc. And therefore, you have to look at the Indo-US relationship much from a different perspective of very strongly shared values, rather than just India being used as a counter or a counterbalancing factor against China. I think what the United States hopes to do is to attack the Communist Party of China and its leadership of China, not the people of China or even a democratic China in the future. So I think this is a very important assessment and a point that we have to understand in India, and based on that, then come to our own conclusions about the strength of the Indo-US partnership. Thank you.
I think the next 5-year plan is also being finalized in China, and Xi Jinping is going to be officially made the leader for life. And I think this aggression could probably intensify further. Let's take one last question as we look to wrap up this very, very exhaustive and interesting discussion. Ambassador Zimbabwe, this is for you. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Quickly coming just as a repartee to Xi Jinping, president for life. Don't forget that what man proposes, God disposes.
So the last question is around, why are we expecting any honorable exit that China may be looking for in the wake of all that has happened in this year? Ambassador?
So I agree with the questioner and the question. I don't think we should look upon it as China looking for an honorable exit. I think what China has, the implications of what China has done in Ladakh over the last 6 months is very, very clear. And the implications, I think, are twofold. One is on the tactical side, and one is on the strategic side. On the tactical side, it is very clear that the Chinese want to ensure that their ground positions are right up till what in their minds is the line of actual control with India. So they're moving their ground positions to where they believe the line of actual control lies. And there are many indications for this. But what is even more important is the strategic implications of what China has done this year since early May. And the strategic implication is that China is clearly showing India, is clearly showing Asia, and is clearly showing the world that it is the hegemon in Asia, that it is the number one power in Asia, and the others better understand this, understand it quickly, and fall into line and understand and accept a hierarchical kind of situation in Asia, a unipolar situation in Asia, and where the 21st century is a Chinese century and not so much an Asian century. So I think that is the implication strategically, and that is the proposition with which India has great problems with, and that's why what we are doing vis-a-vis China is not only not accepting their tactical moves on the ground, but also not accepting their strategic propositions. So I'll stop there, Gauri. Thank you.
All right. I think this brings us to an end of a very exhaustive, interesting discussion. And it's not possible and not desirable either on my part to sum up all the points that have been brought up in this discussion. But I think there are some 2 or 3 very important takeaways. One continued to be the fact that the flux will stay, whether it is in American politics or whether it is whether in the India-China relations, or even how the internal mess in Pakistan may further increase, adding to the tensions, and questions around Biden administration and its perception about India, particularly Kashmir, and Prime Minister Modi as well, could be pertinent for maybe the next few months for all of us. On that note, I want to thank Dr. Pandey, Ambassador Bambavle, for this very, very exhaustive, interesting discussion. And I think the number of questions we took is testimony to how interesting this entire conversation was.
So much. It was a pleasure.